So before we go into the Fall 2 data questions, because CTC is pretty much done with their portion, but wanted to see if we had any particular, so there are some specific, really specific questions that CTC will probably have to address. So I've got one. Can Aaron clarify what EL services the CCSD and SB 1969 documents authorize? There are different codes on the documents. Doesn't matter which code is on the document.
Basically, there's instructions on that document on what they have. You know, I would suggest in this case to talk to your monitoring authority about what each one means. They're the ones who are ultimately going to verify it.
Okay. So can a teacher with an English credential monitor a teacher who does not have the credential? We have an EL student who was having a hard time in English class. We placed her in English structured English immersion with our Spanish teacher who's being monitored by our English teacher.
This one's specific. Let me answer this one in the chat.
Okay. So do you have a suggestion on how to code Edgenuity courses for middle school exploratory humanities English course? We have a language arts credential teacher in the class, but I can't find a code that matches the online program. Actually, we do have humanities. We have a humanities course. So if you go into the CALPADS code sets, Veronica, and you go into the code name and you do a control find for humanities, you will find that we have several, or actually one code for humanities. So you want to use that course code. All right. What about dual language programs? We have one teacher who teaches the English portion and the other teacher who teaches in Spanish. The teacher who teaches in Spanish has a B-CLAD, but the one who teaches in English, this came up as an exception. So what I've seen typically, and the questions that I've been getting about this are for dual language programs where you have two self-contained classes, and one teacher is the teacher that's teaching in English, and then another self-contained teacher is teaching in Spanish. Okay, so what's really important about those sort of regrouping situations is that you don't report them as co-teachers. Let me just be really clear about that. You have two self-contained classrooms, and then the kids swap once during the day, right? It is not necessary to report both teachers on those sections. You want to just report them distinctly, and then the teacher who is providing the Spanish instruction would be required to hold the B-CLAD, right? Is that correct, Erin?
Yeah, that sounds accurate.
Is there a CALPADS code that covers career technical education, Word, Excel? So this is probably in the word processing. So I would say submit a service ticket, because I'd have to look through the course codes to see which CTE pathway that actually covers. Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and get started, and we will try and address some of the other questions in the chat as we kind of go along. We want to get you through this entire webinar, and there's lots of content. All right, so we're in the 2021 academic year, and right now LEAs are going through their Fall 2 data submissions. So just a reminder that the Fall 2 data submissions, even though Census Day was on October 7th, and we're looking at information and courses and staff that we're teaching on October 7th, LEAs have all the way until March 5th to make corrections in CALPADS before we send the data over to CTC. So it's really important that at this time, when you start submitting your Fall 2 files, that you have the relevant staff in your districts review the following reports prior to certification. I cannot stress how important this is to make sure that specific staff within your districts are verifying this information before you certify, because once you certify it, it's done. The file we send to CTC cannot be changed. If it generates an exception, that exception will have to be determined in CalSAS. So the reports are Report 4.3, Staff Teaching Assignment Detail, Report 4.5, Non-Classroom Based or Support Assignment Detail, and new for this year, specific to assignment monitoring is report 3.8 course section enrollment student list. So I'm going to go through each of these reports, and I want to give you some checklists for the things that the individuals that should be reviewing these reports, things that they should be looking for. So this is a representation of all of the columns that you will see in report 4.3 staff teaching assignment detail. I apologize that it's smaller print, but it's a lot of information on this report. So this report's going to show you every teaching assignment that was reported at your LEA, along with their local staff ID and name and SEID, the total years of service, the state course code, your local course ID, the content area subcategory, if the course was identified with a subcategory, the Departmentalized Standards Grade level range, which is the range of grade level standards that's being covered in the course for departmentalized courses. And then we've got some section information. Non-standard instructional level is important for college courses, which we'll talk about in a second. Education services, which is your English learner services. The instructional language, this becomes important for dual immersion settings if a course is being taught in another language. Independent study, that's also really important. I'll talk about it in a second. Charter, non-core, non-college prep. Guess what? You don't have to populate this year. It's not required, and next year we're getting rid of it. So don't even worry about that column. And then we've got online course instruction type, middle school course setting, local assignment option, and English learner course enrollment is just an indicator of whether or not there are English learners enrolled in that particular course. So the first set of staff that need to pay close attention to report 4.3 are credential analysts and human resources staff. The things that they should be looking for specifically on that report is, number one, they need to verify that the teacher's total years of service are correct. This is something that needs to be updated annually. And oftentimes we find that districts are not updating this information on an annual basis. Total years of service means the total years that an educator has been in a position requiring certification. Okay, and that includes time outside of your district. Okay, so it's important that you not only solicit this information from the educator, but that you also maintain it on an annual basis. You need to, credential and analysts and HR folks also need to verify on report 4.3 if any teachers on that report are teaching as part of a middle school course setting. If they are, and there is not a yes in the middle school course setting field, then those will very likely generate exceptions. So have your credential analysts review that, tell you which teachers and which courses they are teaching as part of a middle school core. To be clear, that information needs to be populated in your student information system so that it gets reported up to CALPADS. Okay, so CALPADS administrators work with your credential analysts and HR folks to make sure that the middle school core setting courses are populated correctly. Next, any educator on that report that's on a local assignment option should have a local assignment option code populated in that column. If it's blank, there needs to be a local assignment option code populated. This will prevent an exception. Next, your curriculum and instruction staff. They actually have the biggest job in terms of reviewing the data on report 4.3. So the first thing, they have to verify that the state course code is correct. We've already gone over this, folks. The state course code needs to represent the content being taught based on the standards that were used to develop that course, not on what the teacher is authorized to teach. Next, sometimes the content area subcategory may trigger exceptions. So you need to make sure that you select the correct content area subcategory for that course. For example, we have a general art course, which is course code 9000. An art course is actually going to require that you further delineate the specific type of art that's being taught. Okay, so if it's required, make sure that it's correct. For all departmentalized courses, and what do I mean by departmentalized course? I mean any course code except course code 1000. You need to make sure that the departmentalized course standards grade level range code has been populated appropriately. Again, that's the range of grade level standards that's being taught in a course, either elementary, K4, middle grades 5 through 8, or secondary 9 through 12. Make sure that that is populated correctly because, again, those grade level ranges oftentimes specifically align to a teacher's credentials and authorizations. Make sure that all of your college courses have been coded appropriately in the non-standard instructional level column with either 23 college credit only or 24 dual credit. Those courses, if they've been populated with one of those two codes, will not generate exceptions because college professors are not required to hold K-12 teaching credentials. The next thing that they need to verify are the education services, the EL services that are being provided in that course. If the teacher's not providing an EL service in that course, mark no services, no EL services. You need to check with your teachers to see what specific services they are providing and select the appropriate code, because otherwise it is going to generate an exception if that teacher does not have the appropriate English learner authorization. Any non-English languages that a course is being taught in, this is specifically in dual immersion situations. I will tell you that it is not necessary to populate the instructional language code for foreign or world language courses because there is a subcategory that indicates the language of the course. Okay, so just make sure this is, for example, self-contained dual immersion courses. If the teacher's teaching in Spanish, that you indicate a non-English language in the instructional language column. Remember that those require bilingual authorization. Also, we talked about special day classes. Verify that all the special day classes have been tagged with 700 special education, and those sections that a teacher has that aren't solely for students with disabilities, then you need to remove that 700. The only exception is RSP assignments. RSP assignments have to be reported separately, and we're going to go over this in detail in a little bit. They should be reported separately, and you can use an instructional strategy code of 700. This year, CalSAS was actually triggering exceptions on RSP assignments, and they will be changing the logic for next year so that they don't trigger. Next, make sure, because we've got Education Code 44865, which allows a lot of flexibility in alternative settings. The next two items are two of those alternative settings. So if a course is being taught via home hospital, it's important that you populate the instructional strategy code of 300, home and hospital. Also, if courses are being offered as part of an independent study program, then you need to make sure that that independent study program indicator is marked to yes. Remember, either of those settings qualify for flexibility under 44865, which essentially means the teacher can teach the course as long as they can teach any subject, any grade, as long as they have a full credential based on a bachelor's degree and student teaching. So that's why those two components are really important. For all online courses, you need to make sure that 1, the distance learning indicator is set to yes, and then 2, that the appropriate online instruction type has been populated. We will go over online instruction type a little later in the presentation. Okay, so moving on to report 4.5, staff non-classroom based or support assignment detail. This report, again, is specifically for non-instructional assignments. Any instructional assignments need to be reported as course sections, and that includes pull-out and push-in sections. You should not be reporting those pull-out and push-in teaching assignments here in report 4.5. They need to be reported as course sections. So the only teaching assignments that should be reported in 4.5 are those that are non-instructional, and I gave you some examples before. The teacher induction program coordinator, peer mentoring, or teachers on special assignment. Those are the teaching assignments that you would see in report 4.5. The staff that are primarily responsible for reviewing this particular report are your credential and HR staff. So what I wanted to point out here is that staff have specific job classifications: administrator, pupil services, and teaching job classifications. For administrator and pupil service assignments, it's really important that you pay close attention to using those codes, because if you use an administrator code, CTC is generally going to expect an administrative services credential unless that administrator is on a local assignment option. The pupil services job classification, make sure that that individual's job assignment actually aligns with one of the pupil service codes. And then there was a slide prior where we told you generally pupil service assignments have lots of different credentials that may be required depending on the assignment code that you're using. So pay close attention to that. And then lastly, any teachers that are reported in here, these should represent the teacher's non-instructional assignments. Okay, the next report that you want to make sure you review is report 3.8, course section enrollment student list. So this becomes important for our special day classes and the students that are enrolled in those special day classes. So if you look at the right-hand side of report 3.8, you'll see that we added 2 columns, one for primary disability and one for secondary disability. So when you're looking at courses that you've identified with an instructional strategy of 700, which is special education, you can actually come to report 3.8 and you can filter this report on courses that you identified as special day classes or those that are using the instructional strategy code of 700. Once you filter that list, you'll be able to see a list of the specific course sections and then the students enrolled in those course sections and their respective primary and secondary disability codes. So once you obtain the student rosters, it's really important to make sure that the special education case managers verify any alternate special education placements in the classroom. You have to be prepared to justify that in CalSAS, because again, those special education exceptions are generated based on classes that you've identified as special education, special day classes, and any student for which that teacher doesn't have a specific authorization for that student's primary disability will generate an exception. But there are cases where you could have alternate special education placements where the IEP team has basically said, we are going to place the student in this class and it's purposeful. So you need to verify that with the special education case managers and make sure that's correct. And also, you just want your credential and HR staff to verify that, in fact, the teacher has the appropriate authorizations to provide those services to any students that are not on an alternate SPED placement. All right, so we're moving into common issues and questions. So this is going to address a lot of the questions that we've been getting in the Q&A, and we will go through these pretty specifically. So when you're selecting an administrative assignment code, it's really important that that person's job description performs the following duties, one or more of the following duties. So to develop, coordinate, and assess instructional programs, evaluate and supervise certificated and classified personnel, discipline students and certificated staff and classified employees, manage the school site, district or county level fiscal services, recruit, employ, and assign certificated staff and classified personnel, and develop, coordinate, and supervise student support services. This excerpt comes directly from the Administrator's Assignment Manual that CTC manages, and it is the duties that are performed under an administrative services credential. So if you are selecting one of those codes, make sure the individual actually performs one of these things. If not, don't select an administrator code, period. Now, pupil service assignments, as I told you before, there are several credentials that cover all of the codes that we lump under the assignment category of pupil services: school nurses, teacher librarians, clinical rehabilitative services, other health services, speech and language pathologists. I've been getting lots of questions about speech and language pathologists because districts are under the assumption that they have to report them as co-teachers with a general ed primary teacher, and that's not correct. Okay, speech language pathologist, any special education individual that is providing services, not instruction, but services to students, those assignments get reported in the staff assignment file as non-classroom based or support assignments, okay? Only instructional assignments need to get represented as course sections. Erin or Ann, were there any specific sticking points with respect to pupil service areas where you saw a high number of exceptions?
No, not anything that really stood out. I guess I'll take this opportunity to say that, LEAs are obligated to have a teacher librarian, and we were getting a lot of monitoring authority reported misassignments for schools that didn't have, districts that didn't have librarians. So I would say keep that in mind, for next year. That seemed to be one of the issues that we were having with services.
Okay, great. One of the other things that I kind of heard is that folks were using school counselor sort of incorrectly. So you had folks with the wrong authorization, but they were choosing a counselor code inappropriately. So just make sure you read the descriptions of each of those codes and work with your credential analyst to ensure that that's the appropriate code. Okay, English learners, once again, if the teacher's providing primary language instruction, they have to hold a bilingual authorization in the primary language of the students. Okay, so if primary language is Spanish, they have to hold the bilingual authorization in Spanish. Next, if the teacher isn't providing any EL services, then select Code 5, no EL services. A lot of you are hesitant to select that because you think that you're going to get dinged on another Fall 2 report, which actually identifies kids who aren't receiving EL services. What you need to remember, particularly in departmentalized settings, folks, is we're looking across the student's entire set of courses to determine whether or not the student is receiving English learner services. And it's very likely that one or more of those courses will be providing some sort of English learner services, and then they won't drop into the no services provided bucket, right? So if you have a particular teacher, let's say a physical education teacher, and there's no English learner students in there, you don't have to mark any services being provided because the teacher's not providing any. So just keep that in mind. The other thing is, don't let an administrator tell you, well, all of our teachers are authorized to provide integrated and designated ELD. So mark that code and just do a blanket, service code on every single one of your core sections. Please do not do that because it's being used to generate exceptions in CalSAS, and your credentialists or analysts are having to work through each one of these, and it's very time consuming. Okay, then lastly, educators that are teaching in a departmentalized English language development course. So specifically, we're talking about course code 9104, okay, departmentalized ELD. They need a full EL or bilingual authorization, and for example, the authorization code of ELA 1 or SA 12. Okay, homeroom and student assistant courses also generated lots of questions and lots of exceptions. So we're going to be putting forth some formal guidance this fall too, in the form of FAQs, and eventually the data guide will be updated to reflect this as well. But only homeroom and student assistant courses where the student receives grades or credit should be reported to CALPADS, okay? Those homeroom and student assistant courses where grades or credits are received are required to be staffed by a teacher with a full credential based on a BA in student teaching. So what we found out, particularly in student assistant courses, is you guys were listing the counselor as the teacher of record, or even a principal as the teacher of record. But just remember, if they're receiving grades or elective credit for that course, you should report it, and a teacher with a full credential based on a BA in student teaching needs to be assigned to that course. Now, in terms of which teacher to report on courses, the general rule is you're always going to report the teacher of record, okay? So if the position happens to be vacant on census day, So you don't have a teacher of record. Then you want to make sure that you report the SEID of the teacher, the substitute teacher. Okay, so vacancies are the only time that you're going to report the SEID of the substitute. If there is still a teacher of record, but that teacher of record is on leave, and it doesn't matter the duration of the leave, as long as the district has not made a decision to rehire permanently for that position, then that teacher is technically still the teacher of record. And that's the teachers that should be reported on census day. The only time that you're reporting the SEID of the substitute is when the position is vacant. Okay, so self-contained courses. We get lots of questions about this. How do I know when to use course code 1000, self-contained? It's actually pretty simple, folks. If you have one teacher providing multiple areas of content to the same group of kids all day long, that is a self-contained course, okay? So that can be reported for purposes of Fall 2 at an elementary level, middle school level, and even in secondary alternative settings. You can use course code 1000. There are some caveats that I'll point out for secondary in a minute, but you can use self-contained course code 1000 if your course meets that scenario. Now, departmentalized courses, you're going to use any state course code except 1000. So those generally require a single subject authorization. And they're found primarily at the secondary level, but you can also find them at the elementary level and at the middle school level. So if a teacher is teaching one subject to multiple groups of students throughout the day, that is considered a departmentalized assignment, and it requires a single subject authorization. Okay, that's really important. A lot of elementary schools have PE teachers that pull kids out of class, and they have art teachers that pull kids out, and music teachers, and they teach music to different groups of students all day long. That teacher is required to hold a single subject authorization in whatever subject they are teaching to those students all day long. Not only, departmentalized courses cannot be taught with a multiple subject credential unless they're at the middle school level and as part of a middle school core. We did create some distinct course codes in CALPADS to represent departmentalized elementary school courses. So these should be used for the grade level specified in parentheses for each of these codes. When you have teachers at the elementary level that are teaching these specific subjects all day long to different groups of students. So we've got one for English, history, social science, which only goes up to K6, math, departmentalized K8, music, general, classroom, exploratory, that goes through K8. Physical education is split up between K5 and 6-8 because there are different instructional minute requirements for each of those grade level ranges. And then science only goes through K6, and media arts goes all the way K8. The reason that history, social science, and science only cover K6 is because when students get into grades 7 and 8, particularly for history, social science, they're usually taking world history and then US history. Okay, so typically in those grades, there are standards for world history and US history. Science is sort of the same premise, right? So when you get past grade 6, there are specific standards that have to be covered. So typically you see like life science or earth science. It becomes more subject specific in grades 7 and 8, unless you're using an integrated model, which we will cover a little later in the presentation. Okay, these are our interdisciplinary subjects. So some of you had questions about humanities. So you'll notice that in our interdisciplinary course codes, we have a humanities course code. You're also required to indicate a subcategory for humanities. So because 3 different credentials can actually teach humanities course depending on the emphasis of the course. So if there's an emphasis on English, it would require an English credential. If there's an emphasis on art, it would require an art credential. If there's an emphasis on history, social science, it would be a history social science credential. Okay, we've also got things for homeroom, study hall. Again, remember, you should only be reporting those student assistant and homeroom if the students actually receive credit and grades. We've got student government, life skills, peer counseling, home economics, right? Also in our interdisciplinary subjects, we've got RTI, multi-tiered systems of support. Okay, so if you've got your RTI teachers, you could report their assignments this way. Also your RSP teachers, your special education support resource specialists. There's a specific code for them. Okay, getting into departmentalized standards grade level range codes. These courses last year were required for all courses, and it caused a lot of issues. And it doesn't really make sense to collect these for anything other than departmentalized courses. So this year, this particular code is not required for self-contained courses. It's only required for departmentalized courses. And it captures the range of grade level standards that are being taught in the course. It's not the grade levels of the students. Let me be really clear about that. It is the grade level ranges of the standards that are being taught in the course. So if I have an 8th grade student that is taking Algebra 1, and I have an Algebra 1 course for that student, the student's in 8th grade, I would select a standards grade level range of 9-12 because algebra actually covers 9-12 standards. Okay, our next common issue has to do with reporting a SEID of all 9s. So when is it appropriate to report a SEID of all 9s? Okay, first of all, you can only report a SEID of all 9s in the course section file. Okay, and typically these 9s are almost always going to generate an exception in CalSAS. Okay, the only exception is college courses. So again, as long as you've appropriately identified the course as a college course and the SEID is a generic SEID of all 9s, then it will not generate an exception in CalSAS. Okay. However, all other instances of using that SEID of all 9s will generate an exception. Okay. So you have to be prepared to justify this assignment and determine this exception in CalSAS. So you will have to provide your credential analysts information about that teacher and information that they're appropriately authorized if they are. You can continue to use the SEID of all 9s for teachers for which you cannot obtain their staff demographic or staff assignment information. Okay, that's fine. The other thing to point out is remember that when you're reporting all of these assignments, what we really want to know and what CalPADS is collecting is not necessarily the entity that pays an individual, but it's where that specific person is assigned. So if you have itinerant staff at the district level that serve many sites within the district, we want you to report those individuals at their specific sites. If you have ROP teachers that are serving students at many districts, we want you to report those specific ROP teachers at the distinct sites. The problem is that you may not have the staff demographic and staff assignment information to submit so that you can report that teacher's actual SEID in the course file. And that is fine. You can continue to do that, folks. However, just keep in mind that you will have to provide evidence that that teacher is appropriately authorized in CalSAS, okay, so that that exception can be determined. Now, a SEID of all 9s cannot be used for any charter school teachers beginning this year. All charter school teachers are required to obtain a certificate of clearance through the Commission on Teacher Credentialing, which will issue them a SEID, even if they don't have a credential. Okay, so all charter school teachers are required to obtain a certificate of clearance, and thus they'll be assigned a SEID. So we do not expect to see this for any charter school teachers. Okay, so those college courses, generally teachers teaching college courses qualify for a local assignment option under Ed Code 76004. But again, that is completely dependent on you identifying the course as a college level course.